It is not a museum painting, it is mine.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this beautiful evening in Wyoming. Hot and humid for our standards, but nice to see you all here. Before we get started, just a few announcements. Lots of great programs coming up. If you haven't seen this little brochure flyer, there's some on the table back there with the waters. Please grab one. Lots of great things coming up. Got a new exhibit that you've just been talking about, our Dixie Reese art exhibit. We're going to open that June 22nd. So put that on your calendars, June 22nd. We've got just about 70 works of art in that exhibit. So it's going to be a very nice display. Come out and join us. The night before, June 21st, we're going to have some fun, trivia night here at the museum. So come and celebrate and do Wyoming trivia. We'll have some adult beverages. We're going to drink responsibly, though, here at the museum. So we're being recorded live, so I'm going to say that. But also, a really great way to stay up to date on what we're doing at the museum is by joining the Museum Association. It's a very small annual membership fee. They'll send you a newsletter, email you, text messages if you wish about upcoming programs and events and all the work that they're doing as an association. So grab a flyer on your way out. And otherwise, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Author Bill Bettinson grew up hearing family stories around the campfire about his famous uncle, Robert Leroy Parker, better known as the outlaw Butch Cassidy. Bettinson has spent decades asking questions about the life and exploits of Butch Cassidy. Bill has a passion for Western Americana and family history. He enjoys traveling and researching places where Butch spent time and did time over 100 years ago. He published his first book, Butch Cassidy, My Uncle, in 2012, and a second in 2020 called Butch Cassidy, The Wyoming Years. And he's got both books here tonight. If you're interested, please see him afterwards and grab a book. With a degree in mechanical engineering from BYU, Bill has worked in the oil and gas industry for over 30 years. He is married and has 4 children. Please help me welcome Bill Bettinson.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here tonight. Hopefully everybody's heard of Butch Cassidy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Has everybody seen the movie? It's been a lot of years. No? Well, you got to go rent the movie, or I guess you don't rent anymore. You stream it, right? So, well, anyway, as I said, I've got a couple books and I've been researching. I'm kind of a history nerd. So I just wanted to kind of talk about Butch and maybe share some family stories and whatnot. But anyway, I'm gonna have to put on my eyes here. So my tie to let me turn this on. There we go. Yeah, my tie to Butch Cassidy is his younger sister, and her name was Lula Parker, and she married a Bettinson. And this is her picture when she was younger. She lived to be 96 years old, so I was 15 when she passed away. So I got to know her, and I grew up hearing stories, and she was a fun lady. She liked to have a lot of fun, and I think that's kind of was a trait in the family, because I think Butch was kind of the kid at heart, and it kind of got away from him. But this is Butch's father, Maximilian Parker, and when he was 11 years old, the family joined the Mormon church in England, and they came across the plains in handcarts, and they were in the second handcart company. And Butch's mother, who, if you know what Butch looks like, he definitely favors his mother side with that square jaw and that. Her name was Annie Gillis, and her family was originally from Scotland. She was actually born family moved just before she was born in northern England. But her family came in a wagon train across with the Mormon migration. And the two of them got married and moved to Beaver, Utah. And they purchased this cabin, and it's unfortunately no longer standing, but Butch was born in Beaver, Utah. Whoops. In April 13th, 1866. And when he was 13 years old, the family moved over the mountain to Circleville, and this is the ranch that he lived on as a kid. And the state of Utah actually recently restored the cabin, and it's open as a state historic site. So anyway, he when he was 18 is when he left home. The family was large. He was the oldest of 13 children, and they were rather poor. And I think he could see that there wasn't a great, exciting life just taking care of the ranch and that. And so he wanted to go out and make his mark in the world and that. So he leaves at 18. And this is a picture of the family, the Parkers, in 1895. And this has a little pointer here. This is Annie, the mother. Maximilian was, because of the growing family, he went off working at different areas, so he's not in the picture. And any guess, 1895, where Butch was? He's not in the picture either. This is Lula, my great-grandma. She moved during the exposure, and her face was blurred, so she scratched her face out. You can tell. I have her copy of this, but any idea where Butch was 1895? Any guesses? It was Wyoming. He was here in Wyoming somewhere. He was in Laramie in prison. So unfortunately, he couldn't be in the picture because he was in prison. So anyway, this is kind of a fun picture. On the back of the old picture, it has the name of the horse and the dog. They were important parts of the family, members of the family too. I've got a picture of Butch when he's in South America, and they have the dogs in the pictures too, so it's kind of fun. So anyway, Butch leaves home at 18, goes to western Colorado, and finds some other Mormon cowboys in the Telluride area, and they work on a ranch there. And I guess they get bored one winter and decide next spring they're gonna go rob the bank in Telluride. And so he'd been involved in some cattle rustling, maybe some horse rustling up until now, but this was his graduation to becoming a real outlaw. So they said that he, up until this time, was sending money home and letters and that, but once he graduated to a real outlaw, he stopped sending money home. But anyway, they robbed the bank, and they were successful in eluding capture. They actually paid the local town sheriff to be out of town at the time, and so they left a share of the loot in a hollow tree for the sheriff for his part of being out of town at the time. So anyway, from that he decides to come to Wyoming, and he changes his name to George Cassidy. So up until then, as he mentioned, his real name was Robert Leroy Parker. He was named after his grandfather, Robert Parker. This is an alias. So the Cassidy comes from an outlaw, kind of a small-time outlaw named Mike Cassidy that his father, Maximilian, hired to work on the ranch. And Mike Cassidy gave Butch his first pistol and taught him how to shoot, and they were working on a area ranch, and I guess he showed him the finer points of wrestling cattle and whatnot. So it was kind of getting involved in a little bit in that. So anyway, he didn't go by Butch Cassidy. Butch was just a nickname that came later. He went by George Cassidy, and that's the name he was known as in Wyoming. He has a partner that he picks up here in Wyoming named Albert Hayner, and that's their two signatures from their trials. But we don't know a whole lot about Al Hayner, and he kind of disappeared from history and wasn't much of a well-known outlaw like Butch was. Anyway, he goes up in the Du Bois area after robbing the bank in Telluride, and he he's working as a cowboy. And in the DuBois area, there's this new cabin being built. And the owner of this cabin is Huey Uhlmans, that's standing here in the cabin doorway. And this picture has actually been around for some time, but only in the last few years when we're able to get a clear picture where we could zoom in and look at the faces, then we're able to tell that possibly this is Huey, that this guy here kind of looks like maybe Butch Cassidy. And here's a kind of a photo comparison of his mugshot. And some people don't think it's him. I personally think it's him because the hairline matches. I think the picture's damaged or something where his nose is there and he's kind of got a beard and that. But I personally think that's Butch Cassidy. Anyway, they're working on this ranch, and famous writer, or soon to be a famous writer, Owen Wister. You guys have heard of him, the Virginian he wrote. He comes out, he's living in Pennsylvania. He comes out to Wyoming to hunt and I guess de-stress and whatnot. And he comes to the DuBois area to hunt elk and whatnot, and has a guide there in DuBois that helps him, get him on some big game and that. But he keeps a detailed journal, and he talks about this new cabin being built up from his friend's, the guide's cabin, and playing cards with a couple of the cowboys. He says, played cards till 10, quite a gang here, new cabin and building just above here. And so, and then he also mentions, records that Al Dotery and Bob took an injured cowboy to Washakie, which would be Fort Washakie, for help. They had to come in with a load of hay about 12 miles up Horse Creek for old Huey. And makes you wonder who possibly Al Hainer, and Bob being Robert or Butch. So there's a good chance that Owen Wister played cards and got to know Butch Cassidy. This is, before Butch is really known. So it's kind of a fun tie there to history. Soon after that, this is shows the Uhlman. This is the old map. Shows the Uhlman cabin, and then the DuBois post office is where Owen was staying. And that old cabin is actually right in the town of DuBois today. I mean, obviously it's long gone, but the location of that cabin is right in the town of DuBois now. Here's a picture of the cabin that Owen Wister stayed in. Anyway, after the spend in the fall 1889 in DuBois, they go to we next find them in the county fairs in Johnson County over in Buffalo. And actually we see went through the hotel registers for the Occidental, and he'd signed his name at least a dozen times in the old Occidental between the fall of 1890 and spring of 1891 as George Cassidy from Lander. So, and Al Hainer's in there too. And the reason they came to Buffalo was the horse races. They had a good friend, Manuel Armento, that had race horses in the county fairs and that. And so that was the big thing at the time, was horse races. So they came, and he's also, after they were in Buffalo, they went up into Sheridan and to the county horse races there. So actually, you can see his signature, George L. Cassidy, Lander. And this is Manuel Armento and George Cassidy. There's actually this fascinating hotel ledgers there, a lot of famous people that stayed there. So it's kind of fun going through those. And those are down in Laramie at the American Heritage Center. So next he goes over into Owl Creek, which is over by just west of Thermopolis. And for a time, it looks like he works for the M-Bar, which is owned by J.L. Torrey. And Torrey later became famous for Torrey's Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. He has a huge ranch, him and his brother, called the Imbar Ranch there on Elk Creek. And Butch and Jail Torrey become nemesis. They don't like each other. And Torrey goes out of his way to get Butch sent to prison. Not that he was maybe deserving of it. I don't know. He might have been stealing some of these cattle, possibly. Anyway, he makes friends with another cowboy in the area named Billy Nutcher. And I bring his name up because in the fall of 1891, George or Butch purchases 3 horses from Billy Nutcher. And Billy Nutcher swears that he has papers on them, they're legit. And right after that happens, then there's posse after him for stealing horses. And at the time, you've all heard of the Johnson County War. During that time, there was also a big horse thief war going on. And the cowboys were stealing horses in one state, taking them to another state, selling them, stealing horses in that same state, and then go back. So it was a big ring that was going on. And John Chapman, this is his name, he lived up, or this is his picture, lived up by above Cody. And he had lost a lot of horses. And so he volunteers to track the horse thieves and track this George Cassidy and Al Hainer, because they think they're involved in the horse theft ring. So at the time, there's only 5 counties in Wyoming, and they went from the top of the state to the bottom. And Uinta County was the far, western county, and the county seat's in Evanston, like it is for Uinta County now. But so they go to Evanston and to get help from the sheriff there, John Ward, and he sends out his deputy, Bob Calverley, who there's some strong evidence that Bob Calverley knows this George Cassidy, knows Butch, and there may have been some bad blood between them. Anyway, they track him to the Star Valley area, and it's late in the year, and the snows are high for the passes, and they can't get in to go and arrest him. So they wait till the next spring to go in and get him. This is a picture of Bob Calverley. And so they go in April 1892. And this, if you remember April 1892, that's significant because that's when the invaders are coming over to Buffalo, and they killed Nate Champion over at the KC Ranch, and that just the exact same time. So anyway, Al Hainer, so they find Butch and Al Hainer working at a sawmill in Auburn, and they arrest Al without any incident. And then Butch is, he's not so willing to give himself up. He's like, "Show me your warrant." And they're like, "We don't need a warrant." And they don't have a warrant to arrest him. Anyway, Bob Calverley, his pistol was a Colt model 1878 double action. I don't know if anybody's ever played with one of those, but it's the double action. I think they were trying to figure that out. Colt was. They hadn't quite figured it out. Single action was a very reliable gun, but the double action, they wasn't quite figured out. And the problem with the double action is that the cylinder spins when it's not being used unless the hammer's fully cocked. And so during the attempt to arrest Butch, because he says, "Let's get to shooting," he's resisting arrest. And Calverley says that he points his gun at George Cassidy and right to his stomach, and it misfires. And it misfires 3 of 4 times. The 4th time hits him in the forehead and knocks him out, and then they have him. But I actually have one of those pistols, and I don't know why he wouldn't go with the old single action Army, because that's much more reliable. Anyway, they take him to the store there in Auburn, and the locals said that he had 35 gashes on his head. So after he was down, they were beating him with the pistols and that. So Um, Butch had this charismatic personality. He liked people, and he was able to make friends wherever he went. So while he's in Auburn, the locals liked him, you know. So they come out to help bandage him and that, and so they take him to Evanston. Him and Al Hayner. They hold him there at the Evanston jail for about a month, and then they transfer him to Lander for trial. And this is when the arrest warrant is actually created. Otto Frank is another big cattle rancher over in the Bighorn Basin. Where he owns the Pitchfork Ranch over by Meeteetse. And he files a arrest warrant. It's actually they actually go to trial for, and they find, well, I was going to say, at the same time, we know that, and I mentioned that Nick Ray and Nate Champion are killed over in KC. But during the coroner's inquest with Nick Ray and Nate Champion, they mentioned an outfit leaving Evanston to go to Jackson Hole to arrest some cowboys that were on the. So there's a possibility that Butch was on that invaders list. Is the reason I bring that up. But anyway, so they go to trial in Lander, and they're both found not guilty. And right before the verdict is to be given, Otto Frank files the charges against him for the second horse. Remember, they purchased 3 horses. So I guess they've got, it's not double jeopardy because it's a different horse. So they got one more horse in reserve in case that second trial doesn't work out. So they're rearrested for the second horse and have the second trial coming up. And these are some of the old court documents that are over in Lander. It's funny, they say that the folks over in Johnson County still don't trust Cheyenne, people in Cheyenne, because of the old Johnson County War. I noticed in Du Bois, they said, yeah, we weren't going to send the originals because we'd never see them again. So we made copies and sent them and kept the originals. So I thought that was interesting. Anyway, it was fun to be able to see the actual documents. And yeah, there's the signature again. Not too bad at handwriting. They actually taught penmanship back then, right? So, so during this time with the second trials coming up, my friend Mike Bell from England, who I guess we're recording this for him to watch in the middle of the night in England. Anyway, they recently found a bar ledger for an old bar in Andersonville. Andersonville is over the kind of the town before Thermopolis came to be. And interesting enough, there's quite a few interesting people on there, but here's George Cassidy's bar tab. So I guess he's, 3 bottles of whiskey, and, I'm sure it was all to, for his friends to play poker. It wasn't all for him, right? I'm sure he was, this Mormon cowboy, he doesn't drink, right? No, I'm kidding. I think actually here, there's a George Cassidy arrested in Sheridan in 1893. So apparently he was running up a little bar tab there because he gets arrested for being a common drunk. So I think later on he figured out he wasn't let his senses go, because he was, later on when he becomes famous and he's got the Pinkertons after him, he kind of watches it doesn't let himself go. Anyway, so before the second trial comes about, early 1894, he is basically financially ruined. He kept his stock with this Billy Nutcher, and Billy Nutcher had run up a bunch of bank loans and then disappeared from the area. And so the bank's going to foreclose. They confiscate all the stock, including Butch's, and sell it, and he's financially ruined. So kind of a bad deal. But so maybe that's why he was drinking over in Sheridan, right? Just financially ruined. So anyway, this is a pasture over in Owl Creek where he kept his stock with Billy Nutcher. And so then the second trial comes about. Will Simpson, the Simpson family, that was the governor and senator. That's their great grandfather, Will Simpson. I could talk about him for another half hour on. I think the family called him. What was I just read that Shooting from the Lip or whatever, and said that they called him Brokeback Billy or something. And I guess he was quite a go on some drunk rampages. Anyway, Al Hayner's found not guilty. Butch is found guilty and they value the horse at $5. And Judge Jesse Knight, who had overseen both trials, sentences him to 2 years hard labor. Now, remember Tori and Otto Frank that have the two ranches? Tori's trying to convince the judge to give him the maximum sentence, which would have been at least 10 years. And Judge Jesse Knight isn't going to listen to these other rich ranchers. And so he thinks that giving him 2 years that he'll maybe learn his lesson and come out of prison a better person. Anyway, Hayner is given 30 days for contempt of court. I guess I personally think that Hayner was working with to get Butch, because later on he gets rearrested with another friend and he gets off again and the friend gets arrested or gets sent to prison. So I think he was possibly working against Butch, because after that Butch doesn't have anything to do with him. Anyway, Butch is taken to Laramie to the prison. He enters July 15th, 1894. And this is his mugshot. It's taken about a year after he goes in May 1895. And apparently, the time they didn't process him and take a picture, but they'd had enough escapees that the governor says, we're going to start sending the photographer to the prison and getting mugshots of all of them. So he'd been, they shave your head, but his hair obviously had grown back by then. So. And if you notice this down in the corner, any idea what that is? Exactly. Yeah, and he's kind of got his legs folded like, I'm a tough hombre, don't mess with me. No, anyway.
So what was it on his arm?
Yeah, this is the striped pants, the prison pants.
Okay.
Is what that is.
Does he have a black eye?
So that's what Lula said. She said that he didn't have these squinty eyes, but this is a year after he'd been beat up and that. So I don't know that he would have had, unless those.
That one looks kind of.
Yeah, it does
shiny.
look kind of like he has a black eye, but. Anyway, so he's given 2 years. About 18 months into his sentence, Judge Jesse Knight writes to the governor of Wyoming, Governor Richards, and says, this cowboy, George Cassidy, seems to have a great influence on a lot of the cowboys. And I would like to see him possibly released early so that he would leave prison with a good taste in his mouth, maybe influence the other cowboys for good. And so the governor says, well, I'm willing to do that as long as you can get prominent citizens to guarantee his good behavior. So they put this petition together, and it's quite interesting because Butch obviously had some friends in high places. I mean, you got the sheriff, the mayor, I think there's state senator, several prominent people that swear his good behavior if he's released. So the governor agrees and pardons him 6 months early from prison. Of course, we know from history that Butch had no plans of being a good boy. So he's released January 1896. And so this is January, August. So 8 months later, his good friend that helped him rob his first bank in Telluride His name's Matt Warner, and he's on trial for murder in Ogden, Utah. And so Butch goes to the mouth of the canyon there. It's called Weaver Canyon, and sends in notes to prison to Matt and says, "What do you want me to do? You want me to break you out?" And he's like, "No, hire some good lawyers and see if you can get me off." And Butch is like, "Well, I'm broke. I just got out of prison." So he starts looking for a nice juicy bank to make a withdrawal from. And so he goes to Evanston and cases the bank there. He's seen by some folks. His name comes up in the newspaper. He goes to Logan, Utah, and cases the bank there and decides against it. So he ends up in Montpelier and decides that's a nice juicy bank. So three of them go in and rob the bank, and of I think $8,000. They give it to his attorney, Douglas Preston. He wires it and to the defense team, and Matt gets, I think, 5 years on manslaughter. And the interesting part is Bub Meeks, one of the guys that was helping with the robbery, he gets arrested about a year later after Montpelier, and for his participation, Montpelier gets a 35-year sentence in Boise prison. And like Matt kills 2 people, he gets 5 years. Bub helps rob a bank and gets 35 years. So the moral of the story is get good lawyers, right? Just ask OJ about that, right?
Yeah.
So this is August. The next spring, that winter, the story is Butch and his good friend that helps him with these robberies is named Elsie Lay. And it's not the Sundance Kid. The Sundance Kid kind of came into the picture later, but his real name is William Ellsworth Lay, and his nickname is Elsie Lay. They spend the winter in Robbers Roost, and they decide that they're going to rob the gold payroll in outside of Price, Utah, in the spring, and it's known as the Castlegate robbery. And if you've ever been to Price, it's a narrow canyon going from Salt Lake. They bring the payroll in from Salt Lake on the train. And they spent the winter training their horses so they wouldn't get spooked by the steam engines and whatnot. And they had relays of horses. That's something that Butch really kind of perfected. It was having fresh sets of relays about every 10 miles so that he could outdistance the posse. The posse's horses would be spent and they'd give up the chase. So because of this Castlegate robbery, he gets a lot of front page news. It's a daring daylight robbery, and he gets front page news across the U.S. So what does Butch do? He decides, well, I'm going to go disappear. So he goes to, him and Elsie go down to New Mexico and get jobs with the WS Ranch outside of Alma, New Mexico. And they really like having him work. He grew up on a ranch. He's not afraid to work. And Elsie's really good with horses. They actually want to hire Butch as foreman of the ranch because he seems to have this endless supply of cowboys that can come in and help. And for some reason, when these cowboys are working on the ranch, all the rustling stops. So I don't know if the reputation got out and the others in the area know that this is the Wild Bunch running this ranch and you're not to mess with it. But anyway, they really liked having Butch there. The Pinkertons are coming in and kind of figuring out that this guy working on the WS Ranch as Jim Lowe was actually Butch Cassidy. Jim Lowe is being his alias. And so during the time that he's working on the WS Ranch, there's a Union Pacific train outside of Wilcox, which is over by Rock Creek, that's robbed in the middle of the night in 1899. So like the movie, they used too much dynamite, destroyed the express car, as you can tell. And I personally don't think that that Butch was physically at Wilcox. I think he may have helped with the planning of it. And this is me, and some people disagree with this, but I think when Butch was being released from prison, he had made some promise to the governor of Wyoming that he wouldn't turn a trick in Wyoming. And so by him physically not being a participant, he was in his mind keeping his promise to the governor. But if I help plan it, then, you know, I'm not physically there. That's my 2 cents for whatever it's worth. But they successfully elude the posse, and Will Simpson, who prosecuted him, and the Simpson families actually lived up in Du Bois when him and Al were working for Huey Ullman, and they became good friends. But he swears up and down that Cassidy he met him near the time the Wilcox robbery went on. He says, we know that only cash was taken from the train robbery, and Butch has gold with him. And he was taking it to Tom Skinner's bar in Thermopolis. And he goes, you know, we know there was none taken, but actually there was. Simpson didn't know it, but about a year after the robbery, they find the gold mail bags up in near Saratoga or whatever, and the bags are, you know, have the amount that was taken, and it was several bags that adds up to about 50,000. Anyway, Simpson supposedly is told by Cassidy that he had nothing to do with the Wilcox robbery. I mean, I'm sure. Did you rob the train? No, I didn't rob it. I mean, what else are you going to say, right? So anyway, there's a possible story, and I don't know that there's much to this, but there was a story that Butch, at this point, is getting tired of being chased by the Pinkertons, by the law, and so he sees that Matt Warner, you know, he's given this short sentence and he's released. You know, possibly if I give myself up, can I get amnesty? And so he goes and meets with this Orlando Powers in Salt Lake, and this was Matt Warner's lead attorney. And Powers doesn't give him much hope. He says, if Utah gives you amnesty, then another state's just going to extradite you, and you're never going to rest. So at this time, and I always thought this was phooey, or there's actually letters that support this idea that he was willing to be a payroll guard on the Union Pacific, which, you know, I mean, that's like the coyote or the fox in charge of the hen house or something, you know. I mean, it never came about, but there's stories associated with that. Anyway, about this time, 1900, Butch makes up his mind that he's going to go to the other side of the world, South America, and start over. And he wants to have a ranch, and he wants to live a normal life. And so in order to do that, he needs to rob a few more banks to build up his nest egg to go to South America. So anyway, there's another train robbery in Wyoming near Tipton, which is it's just off at I-80 at the the Continental Divide. He actually passed it on I-80. Anyway, again, I think Butch maybe helped with the planning, but wasn't physically there, because 3 weeks later he's at a bank robbery in Nevada. But anyway, like in the movie, they used too much dynamite to destroy the express car, but successfully get away. But this is where I think Butch was, and this is where Sundance comes into the picture. So it's Butch, Sundance, and Will Carver that robbed the bank in Winnemucca of $35,000 in gold. And I think Butch decides that gold is the currency that he wants to deal with, because the Wilcox robbery, when they blew up the express car, some of the currency was damaged and was burnt on the corners. Plus, they have serial numbers. And actually, at the time, we didn't have a national currency, and so they're specific to the banks that they're going to. And it was actually going to the Bank of Portland, Oregon. And what they got the outlaws on was forgery of the bank president and that, because they forged their names. But with the currency, they're able to track the serial numbers. And so, but with gold, there's no tracing that. So anyway, they robbed the Winnemucca Bank of 35,000 in gold. And this is his last U.S. robbery that I believe that he was involved in. Shortly after this is September 1900. In November 1900, the famous Fort Worth photo is taken. And the cowboys meet in Fort Worth. The story is that Will Carver here is getting married, and so they decide they're gonna get all duded up for a picture. And the photographer is quite proud of the picture, and he displays it in the studio's window. And the story is that a Wells Fargo agent was walking by and sees Will Carver, one of them he recognizes, and soon the Pinkertons order 50 copies and make wanted posters from it. So probably not the smartest thing, but anyway, this is Butch. This is Sundance here. This is Kid Curry. And then this is Ben Kilpatrick. His nickname was the Tall Texan. So this is probably the last time the five of them, and there were other members of the gang, but these five got together in Fort Worth. Elsie Lay, I talked about, he actually, when they were at the WS, he decides to go off on and join the Ketchum gang, and they rob a train, and he's wounded and captured, and he's given a life sentence in New Mexico in Santa Fe prison. He's later gets out, but he wasn't available to go to South America, so I think that's when Sundance kind of became Butch's partner out of necessity, because he needs somebody to travel with. But Butch and Sundance decided they're going to go to South America. And so they go to New York, and kind of like in the movie, they kind of live it up. And the Pinkertons figure out, because they're based in New York, they figure out that they were just here playing under our noses and we didn't know it. So they're kind of ticked off. But unlike the movie, they don't show up in some, I don't know, you remember the story, they show up at a state or a depot or something, and there's like, what would you possibly want to buy down here, because it was just nothing. But they actually go to Argentina and establish a ranch and live as law-abiding citizens for several years until I guess they get bored, or I don't know. I think that there was they became adrenaline junkies. They robbing these banks was an adrenaline rush, and being a law-abiding citizen's kind of boring. So anyway, this is a picture of the ranch, and it's near Cholila, Argentina. And I actually went down to visit the ranch in 2007. It's a beautiful spot. These are the Andes, the base of the Andes. I caught some trout just a few hundred yards from his cabin. That was kind of fun. Here's a photo of them in 1902. This is supposed to be Butch here by his horse. And this is Sundance and Etta. And this couple right here, when I went down, their grandson was my host. And they were convinced, they helped them escape from Argentina. They were convinced that they made it back to the U.S. and we're okay. That's what the guy, their grandson, told me. But anyway, oh man. So I updated this presentation and I saved it on an external hard drive, and then I left that home. So I got a new picture that shows this Tea Party photo, and it's just awesome because it's has much more detail, and you can see Butch. They zoomed in, you can see he's got like a cigarette in his hand, and he has a Montana Pete cowboy hat on his lap. And anyway, sorry about that. Next time I'll have that. But anyway, this is their cabin, and this is Sundance. Etta, she's serving tea, and they actually have two dogs here. I'm really disappointed I don't have that picture to show you. Sorry about that. Anyway, this is the cabin today, what it looks like. And the little town of Cholila has restored it, and it's kind of a little touristy spot that you can go and see. And when I was there was like family from France, and I mean, they were, they've become international celebrities because of the movie, which is kind of fun. But anyway, so they live in relative peace for about 4 years, and then there's a bank robbery 700 miles away from their ranch in Rio Gallegos. And during this time, the Pinkertons were, as they're writing letters home or to friends, Pinkertons are reading the mail, trying to figure out where they're at. And Sundance is writing to his sister Samantha, and they intercept this. And so they send an agent down to Buenos Aires. He meets with the American consulate, he knows where they're living. And he actually, that's an interesting story, because I think he kind of was buying them time, because he kind of gave the Pinkertons some misinformation that, you'd have to cross all these jungles, and really there's no jungles. It's just desert that you got to cross to get to the ranch. It was where the ranch is even today is a very remote area. But the Pinkertons figure out where they're at. They go back to the U.S. banks and railroads and say, we know where these two are at. Will you fund us to go down and arrest them? And they're like, they're out of our hair. They're not robbing us anymore. We don't want anything to do with them. Let them stay down there, And so the Pinkertons notified the authorities and said, if there's ever a robbery, these two notorious outlaws are likely responsible. So when this Rio Gallegos bank robbery occurs, and it has some of the earmarks of it has relays of horses but there is evidence that they signed papers on the day of the robbery to obtain ownership to their land. And so there's pretty good proof that they weren't physically there, but likely they had taught some friends, if you're going to rob a bank, this is what you need to do. And so they get wind that the authorities are coming to question them, they're going to arrest them. And so that's when they decide to leave. They sell off the ranch or the possessions, and they escape into Chile, and then eventually work their way north to southern Bolivia. This is about 1908 or so. And November 1908, there's a payroll robbery, and by two gringos, and they see the two gringos staying in town in the little town of San Vicente, Bolivia. And the policeman, there's a little scuffle, a battle, and the two outlaws are kind of cornered and likely wounded. And during the night, they hear two shots. And then the next morning, they go in, and the two outlaws are dead. And it was like a suicide pact. The one outlaw shot the one in the forehead and then put the gun to his temple. And of course, the story is this was Butch and Sundance. And the reason that story really got going was they were friends with an American engineer named Percy Siebert. And he's the one that said that these two outlaws were likely Butch and Sundance, but he never physically went and saw the bodies. They were never identified. They were buried as unknowns. They didn't know who they were. And, I don't know if PBS in the 90s, they actually went down with Clyde Snow and exhumed what they thought were the two graves and did DNA testing against family DNA. And it turned out it wasn't Butch and Sundance. And of course, then we just dug up the wrong graves. But personally, I think that they dug up the correct graves. It wasn't Butch and Sundance like they wanted it to be. There were other outlaws in the area at the time. And anyway, Lula always claimed that Butch came back to the family, visited the family in 1925 in Circleville, Utah. She married a local boy from Circleville, and all her sisters moved away, but she stayed there and took care of her dad, who was a widower, and her bachelor brothers, and would often cook for them. She gets invited to go and cook for a guest, and she goes down and meets Butch. So this is 1925. He's probably in his 60s at this point, and he stays with the family about 2 weeks. He goes up on the mountain with his brothers, and then doesn't come back and visit, but they stay in touch through letters. But the family was very careful to destroy any letters. They didn't want any evidence that Butch was back, and so the father Maximilian. The story was that he made the family members that were there promise that they would never talk about it, and they would just go along with the stories that Butch was killed in South America. And so that's the family story. So anyway, this is something that, because there's no solid evidence one way or the other, it's going to be debated till the end of time. But anyway, that's pretty much the end. And so do you, any questions, or I know I kind of went quick, but
What year did they go through the hole in the wall?
so
The two of them.
so from 1889 till he went to South America in 1900, so it would have been the 1890s that he was over there. So there was a story that the Blue Creek Ranch that's in the hole in the wall was owned by Butch. And that's really, as you dig into that, it's just a story, because it was actually owned by a Parker, but it's like John Brown Parker, not the same Robert Leroy Parker. But it actually, there is evidence that one of his friends, Harv Ray, actually owned the Blue Creek for a short time. He actually filed on the original homestead claim, but then later gave it up. So there were certainly his friends that had property and ranches in the hole in the wall area, but I don't think he physically spent a lot of time in hole in the wall.
Have you taken that tour?
Yes, actually, I'm helping tomorrow.
Oh,
I'm actually speaking in the morning, and then as soon as I'm done here, I'm headed there, because the last 10 years I've been helping out with that tour. So yeah, if you haven't done that, I encourage you to go, because it's pretty awesome, because they get permission to go through, the private areas and that you don't normally get to see. So
it's outside of KC, Wyoming.
yeah, so the Hoof Prints from the Past Museum is the one that does the tour.
And they feed you too.
Yeah,
I have a friend that cooks for it.
yeah, so they have a lunch in the afternoon. So hopefully the rain's not gonna, it's gonna be stayed for a while. But any other questions? Where Butch is buried or anything like that? Or
Where is
Nobody knows.
yeah, I don't. So that's one thing Lula said, that she knew where he was buried, but she would never say where he was buried, because she was worried about them digging his grave up. At the time we thought, oh, that's crazy, they're not going to do that. But obviously that's exactly what they do. They want to verify it was him. So, and she didn't want a big monument for him, because, she said he was an outlaw. He broke his mother's heart. And that's one of the stories that she always said, was that Annie would walk the fields of their ranch crying over her wayward. She actually had 2 sons that were wayward, and she was, praying that they'd come home and turn their lives around. The one brother actually did. He actually robbed a stage in their bags, and it was a federal offense, and got sent back to Detroit. And they had to work with the local senators in Utah to get a presidential pardon. And after about 8 years, he did get William McKinley, before he was assassinated, granted his pardon, and he came home and married, and he didn't want any more to do with being an outlaw. So anyway,
So, he only served 18 months in jail his
Yeah.
whole life?
right. So I was talking about the WS Ranch. He was actually arrested in St. John's, Arizona, when he was leaving the WS, but he was going by Jim Lowe. And so he said, wire the WS Ranch and ask him about Jim Lowe, and they'll vouch for me. And William French, who was the manager of the ranch, I guess he knew he was Butch Cassidy, but he didn't want to give him up because it would implicate him too. So he said, yeah, Jim Lowe's a good guy. And so they released him right after that. So.
There
How
was
are you
another
related?
TV movie that on the, and I think it was Etta Place was the main character in
Yeah.
that movie. And what kind of woman was she? Do you have any idea?
I think she was a very, I mean, again, I wish I had that photo because you can zoom in and see, you can actually see her wedding ring she has from Sundance because the two of them visited his family back east and he introduced her as his wife and that. But yeah, we don't know a lot about her because at some point she decided she didn't want to be in South America anymore. And so he took her back to the States, to San Francisco, and then she disappears from history and we don't know her real name or, what happened to her. So, yes.
How are you related? How's your,
So Butch is my great uncle. So, yeah, so Lula is my great grandma and Lula is a sister to Butch. So that's my tie.
Michael Bell would like to hear about Butch being arrested in Colorado for stealing his own horse.
Yeah, there you go. I can't believe Mike's awake.
He's
to this.
watching.
So Butch was another arrest of Butch was in Montrose, Colorado, before he robbed the bank in Telluride. He left home with two horses. One was a colt. He sold the one older horse, but he kept the colt and he kept it with the rancher. The rancher wanted to buy the colt from him, and Butch wouldn't sell it. And Butch would be gone for long periods of time from the ranch. And so when Butch finally went to get the colt, the rancher swore out a warrant because people have seen the horse with me for a long time. So it's my horse. So Lula tells a story that Maximilian had to go over to Montrose to vouch for him. And Mike Bell actually found the old newspaper accounts that showed him being in jail in Montrose. So it verified this family story. So anyway, so Maximilian went over and cleared it up and he tried to get him to come home at the time. And Butch was like, I just want to make a little more money and then I'll be home. And he should have put handcuffs on him and dragged him home because first then we wouldn't be talking about him. So
I still would have. I mean,
They're gonna do what they're gonna do.
yeah.
yeah.
So Lula wrote a book. Are there other written family sources from other siblings?
No. So Lula being the last surviving member of the family, because of that family pact, they weren't supposed to talk about it. She waited till all of her siblings passed before she wrote her book. It's called Butch Cassidy, My Brother. It's long out of print, but that's why I chose the title I did for my first book, Butch Cassidy, My Brother, or my uncle. But yeah, she's the only other family member that wrote a book on Butch Cassidy. So I wish Butch would have kept a journal and we could find that. So answer a lot of questions. Any other questions?
You never know.
Yes. Go ahead.
How much money did he take?
It was in the thousands. I mean, and equivalent to today's, it would be in the millions of dollars. So, I mean, I don't know the exact figure right off, but tens of thousands and equivalent to today's dollar value, it's in the millions. So.
Any children?
That's a great question. When he visited the family, he said he never got married, didn't have any children. But obviously, as he was around, there's a good possibility. And there's many stories. And I actually years ago met a guy over in Lander that he had a girlfriend that was a part Indian. Her name was Mary, and this guy was a descendant of this Mary, and he certainly had family features in that. they were gonna do DNA to see if he was, and I don't think, I've lost touch with them, but they didn't really like this Mary because when she had the baby, she never told Butch, this is the story, I can't verify this is all true, but she didn't tell Butch that it was his, but she didn't want the baby, and she actually threw the baby down an outhouse, and her mother went and recovered the baby and raised the baby. So the family doesn't like this Mary at all because of that. But
Oh, he probably doesn't like Mary.
so anyway,
Okay.
that's, so yeah, not that we know of anyway.
Thank you.
All right, anybody want to buy a book? I'm happy to sign it.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy it.
Okay. Hey, there you go.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Is that more,
Oh, just a final reminder, June 21st, trivia night, June 22nd is opening for our Dixie Reese exhibit titled No Time for Tears, The Life and Art of Dixie Reese. So those are the next two events. We hope to see you out for those. Otherwise, have a great evening. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
My daughter's neighbor.
I have